then share my screen when I'm ready to share? Okay, sweet, I'll do that. Hi, everybody. I'm Maris. Thank you for coming to the live draw hosted by the New England Aquarium. We're going to be doing some Halloween-themed animals today. So I did a little research and looked for some spooky, slimy, scary, and just fun animals. I feel like scary is not really the word I can use because they're not always that scary. They might seem scary. And we'll talk about that later. But a little bit about myself. I'm a writer and illustrator. I wrote and illustrated this book called Coral Reefs, Cities of the Ocean. It's part of the Science Comic series. And I spent 8 years at the New England Aquarium as an educator. So I have kind of a general background in ocean science. For today, I actually had to do a lot of research because these are animals I didn't really know that much about, except for the moon snail. We're going to start with a moon snail. But for the live draw, you can grab a pen and paper or pencil and paper, eraser, whatever you like to make art with, that's totally fine. And I say this all the time, if you don't want to just draw, you can write poems about these animals. You can sculpt them if you have like Play-Doh or clay lying around. I just like to take people through how I draw animals and how learning about them informs the art that I make with them. So we're going to be starting with a moon snail. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm drawing today in Photoshop. And that's not my favorite way to draw, but it's the easiest way for you to see what I'm drawing. Oh, and I meant to say, if you do have a black or dark blue or dark purple piece of paper for the last animal and maybe a white colored pencil or a white crayon, so it will be the last animal that we do today, but it would be pretty fun because we're going to go to the deep sea for that one. And I thought it'd be fun to draw with light marks on dark background instead of dark marks on a light background, which is what we're going to be doing. You do not have to be an artist to join in. All you have to do is just bring your enthusiasm and have something to make marks on the paper with. So share my screen and boop. Start sharing. Hopefully you should be able to see my screen now. Again, I'm working in Photoshop. I am using a tablet. This just plugs into the USB port on my computer. And this just helps so that I write. It's a little harder to draw with a mouse. There's no right or wrong way to work digitally. I just like to show you the tools that I'm using just because I feel like that's sometimes a question that comes up. Oh, and if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and I'll pause after each drawing session to answer questions. So yeah, moon snail. And I'll mention up in the top right-hand corner, the things that I pay attention to the most when I'm going to draw animals or just anything in nature, but for animals is body shape. I like to look at fins and limbs. So if they have arms, fins, mouth, which we'll talk a little bit about with this friend, eyes, patterns. And because I like to use comics to tell my stories, I also look at behavior. So if I can watch a video of the animal or learn something about how it survives in the wild, that usually helps me draw it because it will give me an action or a story or just something to inspire me with. So we're going to start with our friend Snail. And I will mention also that I use references. So before we did this today, I looked up a couple pictures of moon snails and I did a couple drawings too. These are probably a little small to see, but I just did some doodles and took a couple notes because I do research ahead of when I do these things. So how many people have ever been walking on a beach in New England or mid-Atlantic and found a clamshell that has a little tiny perfect hole in it, like right here? It doesn't have to be exactly right there. When I was a little kid, I used to call these necklace shells because that hole looked perfect for you to string through and have a necklace. So the animal that makes that hole is usually a moon snail. So now that we've drawn the poor clam that got eaten, and we'll have some other clams get eaten, I want to introduce you to the moon snail. So to start this animal, we're just going to start with a circle. I love snails, but I find their shells pretty hard to draw. Not in a bad way, just I don't know why the spiral part is hard. And you'll notice that when I make lines, I'm going to erase a bunch, and that is totally fine for you to do as well. Erasing is not because you made a mistake. Erasing is just as important part of drawing as making the marks. So I tend to think of erasing as just taking away lines so I can put other lines there. So start with a circle, and then see if you can just do a spiral. So I just start with a circle, and then I start it wrapping in on itself, kind of like you're making a giant cinnamon bun. But don't eat it because it would be very hard and crunchy because this is the shell of a snail. So that's where our snail friend lives. But the moon snail's foot, its body, is so big that by the time they get full grown, they generally don't go inside their shell very much. And you're going to see why in a second. So the basic shape of the moon snail's body is kind of like the bottom half of a triangle. So I'm going to use that as my guide right now. So basically just like a big bottom half of a triangle, or, you know, maybe like if you draw a line across the top, it's a trapezoid. But its foot, which is another name for a snail's body, is so big that it comes up on the sides. And I'm going to use that triangle as a guideline, but I want to make this body soft and squishy. So in order to make soft and squishy for drawings, I'm going to want to use a lot of rounded lines instead of hard lines. So I'm just going to kind of let my soft and squishy flag fly. I'll do a little erasing here. These are one of my favorite animals. When I worked at the aquarium, we have them in the edge of the sea touch tank area. And then we also sometimes bring them to schools when we did school visits. So our moon snail has some antennae on the front. And moon snails don't have much by way of eyesight. They kind of get around and find their clams by feel and by smell. So I'm going to erase the bottom part of this line here. And then just draw some folds in here on the side. So a couple lines to show that this is a magnificent foot. Now, if anybody has ever touched a snail before, the shell is hard because it's, you know, kind of like bones on the outside. It's a hard outer part to protect their soft, squishy body. And if you've touched the soft, squishy body part, snails are pretty slimy. The moon snail, in my opinion, gets like the award for the slimiest. So I want to draw some mucus on here too. Some little drippy mucus. It's like the boogers of the sea. I love it. And we'll draw a mucus trail here as well. Now, if you were a little young moon snail, you could pull your foot into your shell. And I'll do a little drawing of that. And this is where I'll show you how hard it is for me to draw a snail shell. I don't know why it's so hard sometimes. We'll draw the opening. And then this is kind of looking at the snail shell from the bottom. So sometimes it looks a little bit like that. But if a moon snail wants to suck their whole body into the shell, they have a special, I call it the front door, but its fancy name is the operculum. They have a hard part on the bottom of their shell that basically can close in there. So maybe this one didn't get in all the way. It's got a little bit of its squishy body sticking out, and that's okay. It's hard to, sometimes it's hard for me to put on my pants. It's hard for a moon snail to fit its body inside the shell. It's just life. But this will protect a younger moon snail from predators, like, well, not all the time. Sometimes seagulls will get them, but protect them from large predators. So let's go back to our moon snail. And I want to show the moon snail in action because mouth is one of the things that I like to talk about, but we can't really see the moon snail's mouth. So if we were to do like kind of a inside of the moon snail, so up inside here, like on the inside, they have a mouth called a radula. And a radula kind of, if you look at it under a microscope, almost looks like a zipper. It's got like little teeth on either side. So kind of like this. And the teeth of the radula are hard. And these teeth are hard enough to scrape a hole over time in a clamshell. And I think moon snails also use, there's maybe some enzymes in their mucus that help break down the shell, but they basically scrape this little tiny hole in there. So I wanted to show a moon snail slowly, well, not that slowly because we'd be here all day, catching a clam. This is like the absolute slowest like animal hunting video ever. So we'll do our little circle friend down at the bottom. little antenna, and I'm very much simplifying this animal here, and we'll have a little clam sticking out of the sand. Moon snails tend to like sandy beaches. So if you think about where clams usually are usually in the sand because they dig down into the sand, again, to avoid predators like seagulls and things like that. So most of the places I've seen moon snails have been kind of like nice sandy beaches at low tide. You don't normally see these animals. Usually what you see is their leftovers. So we've got, this is where the comics come in. Delicious snail. Or sorry, delicious clam. And then we'll have our moon snail kind of come up a little bit and wrap its body around our poor clam friend. It's okay. It's a circle of life. And some of how I know to draw this is just memory. Some of it's making stuff up a little bit just because I actually haven't seen this, or maybe I have seen this in real life before, or I've seen like sped up footage of it. And one of my favorite sound effects for eating is om nom 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 nom. Om nom 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 nom. I think it's probably from a cat on the internet that sounded like that eating. And then we'll have the leftovers of our poor clam. Maybe we'll make the shell in 2 pieces. Have that little circle there. And then maybe we don't even see our snail. Maybe our snail, or maybe we just see the back end of it. So there you go. You got a little snail comic on the bottom about them eating. I wanted to choose the moon snail first because I feel like its body shape is kind of fun and simple. And I went with, I know it's not super spooky, but I figured the moon. And then maybe if you wanted to, like, you know, fiction this up a little bit, you could have a story about a moon snail werewolf that's a moon snail that then turns into a big slimy werewolf. I don't know. I mean, whatever. I feel like it's really fun when you let stuff in the real life inspire fictional things. Like, it's fun to use your imagination. Does anybody have any questions about snails before we move slightly deeper in the ocean?
I think everyone's so enraptured, they don't have any questions for you.
Alrighty, on to our next animal. We're gonna head to, so moon snails are can be found off the coast of eastern Canada and also eastern US. And they're only found as far down as about North Carolina. We're gonna head to a little further south, kind of the Caribbean, but even off the coast of Florida and North Carolina, and check out some rocky, reefy areas for green Moray eels, which are one of my favorite reef animals. So green Moray eels, or Moray eels in general, are a type of fish. Their basic body shape looks like this. So draw just like a tube that's pointy at one end, and then we'll work on the face. Slips down a little bit like that. Little bumps in the front, and then a little smiley face. I kind of gave it like a weird dolphin face. That's not right. Hold on, let me. Even I make mistakes sometimes. We got eye there, gill there, and then they do have, this is an absolute chonker. I really like this friend right here that we've created. A dorsal fin on the top. But for the most part, eels, Moray eels, are big muscular tubes of fish. They're fish tubes. And apologies, I'm just going to talk a lot about mucus today because I think mucus is awesome. These friends are covered in mucus, which is cool. That protects their somewhat soft skin on their body because you generally don't see Moray eels zooming through the ocean like this. That is not how it goes. So I wanted to show you their full body, but I think we can make them a bit more realistic. So I'm gonna delete our friend. Now, keeping that body in mind, they're a lot more serpentine. They move a lot more swiggly. So we're gonna try and do something. This is gonna be a little tricky because we're working some dimensions, but we want to have our eel go like this. So start by just lightly drawing an S. And the top part of the S, I want you to make it kind kind of like that. We're going to give our S some dimensions. So we've drawn that part. So it's kind of like you put a Band-Aid over the top. Now behind that, we're going to draw like that. And it's almost like where this Moray eel is blowing in the wind. And then the last part of the S, we'll have it come to a point. I'll zoom in a little bit if that's easier to see. So, and this might take a little bit of erasing too. Again, remember, erasing is just building that drawing. I'm going to erase that line. And I'm going to erase that line. And we'll make our friend a little bit rounder. They don't have such harsh lines, but when you do the underdrawing, it's a lot easier to think of that. And they have that dorsal fin. So on the back half, I'm going to draw that dorsal fin there. And then it's also here. And then it's also here. Don't worry, we'll give this friend a head, I promise. I guess that is pretty spooky. A headless eel. So now we've got our mouth part. So we've got kind of that sloping part down. And their bottom jaw usually does jut out a little bit further down. So that's one of the things that I try and keep in mind. You know what? I feel like this friend needs some teeth, a little spooky teeth, a little eyeball, and what fish is complete without some gills in the back there? They've got kind of a weird like gill hole. So that's a little bit more indicative of a Moray eel's movement. We'll do some motion lines there, kind of slithery, but still, if you see a Moray eel, whether it's at the aquarium, there's a couple in the giant ocean tank, or even if you're diving out in the wild, the most way that you're going to see them is not like this. They usually, I've seen them come out like this at the aquarium once or twice, and it was for an evening event, or like I worked at the camp program, and sometimes we'd camp overnight, and the Moray eels would come out at night. But for the most part, if you see a Moray eel, it's not going to be out like this. So I don't want to put an X over this one. We'll put it up in the corner just to be like, not exactly how it goes. You're mostly going to see them hiding in a hole or hiding in the reef somewhere. So let's give this friend a little bit of environment to hang out in. So maybe we've got like a rocky overhang, and then maybe another rock in the front. Rocks are just big squiggly lines. And okay, so usually what you'd see for a Moray eel is just this. Just the little head poking up. I like that they kind of look like they're smiling. And it's not a smile or not a frown. Sometimes they can look pretty creepy too. And I think that's just our heads tell it, like our brains being like, oh, it looks creepy. But they're like, they don't get super happy or super grumpy or super mean looking. It's just the face they were born with. It's just what it's like. So I'm gonna fill in the dark part because they, you know, it's kind of like a big gaping hole that leads into their fish body. And they do have cute little nostrils, so you give some nostrils. Back. So again, this is an instance where I know a little bit about their behavior and what their life is like. So this is a kind of a more accurate how you might see a Moray eel. Now, they don't have the best eyesight. Their smell is kind of one of the best things that they have going for them. And if you're hiding in the reef all day and you don't really want to move around too much, but you want to catch food, one of your best bets is to be an ambush feeder, which means you sneak up on your prey. So imagine a little fish is swimming by. Here, I'm gonna move this friend. I'm gonna put you on a different layer. Turn off that layer. There we go. So imagine a little friend is swimming by, and you know what? I'm gonna do another layer so we can do this kind of animated style. We've got a little fish swimming by. Just minding its own fishy business. The fish could whistle. This one would be. Okay, whistling. There we go. So this fish comes and it swims right in front of that Moray eel. And that Moray eel is going to shoot out of its little hiding spot. And You might have seen some of the teeth that they have, but we've got an extra Halloween surprise for this Moray eel, because there's more teeth hiding inside their body, and I'll tell you about them in just a second. This is like one of my favorite animals to talk about, just because I think they're super awesome. But inside the eel's throat are another set of jaws. Actually, no, let's. I feel like the action shot needs to have a big eyeball. No, bigger. Ha. So we've got teeth up here, teeth down the bottom, and we're going to draw this a little bit in 3 dimensions so you can see inside their mouth. Now, inside a Moray eel's mouth are these things called pharyngeal jaws. They're basically another set of jaws with teeth on the top and bottom that will actually help pull its prey into its throat. And I always liken it to, this is a scary movie if you're a kid. Alien, I feel like it's more of a grown-up scary movie. But they're the aliens and aliens the movies, they have pharyngeal jaws too. So they basically have a big mouth that opens up and then a little tiny mouth that says, hey, I'm gonna get you. So let's draw this friend's pharyngeal jaws. Now usually you couldn't see them as well, like if you were just watching an eel catch something, because A, they're catching their prey really fast, and B, a lot of it is happening inside their mouth. I'm pretty sure there is really neat X-ray footage of them using their pharyngeal jaws, but it's basically just like another little mouth with some teeth in there. I don't know. I think this is pretty spooky. It's like spooky cool, because it's like, well, that would be weird if I had pharyngeal jaws, but I think it makes sense for a Moray eel. And maybe you don't think it's spooky. Maybe you think it's totally, and that's okay too. I feel like, for me, what's interesting about a lot of animal facts is awesome adaptations that are so different from what I'm used to. And I think that's like, when I learn something about an animal that's like, wow, that is so cool. That's like my favorite part. So I think we need to draw a scared fish in here. So maybe this fish gets away. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. And maybe it's doing like a, can I draw this fish so it's, does that come across? Does that fish look scared to you? It's okay if you make yourself laugh when you're drawing. Sometimes my drawings make myself laugh, and it's pretty fun to be able to make something that is silly. And you probably know that from reading books. Like maybe you've read a book that has cartoons in it that makes you laugh. And I think the power of cartoons and silliness is pretty fun. So I don't know, will this tiny fish get away from the pharyngeal jaws? We don't know. But I can turn off, let's see, who should I turn off? I can turn off this one just to show that drawing. So yeah, Moray eels, pretty cool. I like them. Super slimy friends, covered in mucus, got an extra set of jaws. I mean, that's pretty spooky. Any questions before we move on to our next animals?
No, we're still good.
Okie doke. So we are going to travel a little deeper into the ocean, and actually to the complete other side of the world. And we're going to look at weedy sea dragons. Now, these animals are native to southern Australia. They live in coastal areas, so they like it if it's rocky, but with lots of seaweed. So they don't mind seagrass beds and basically anywhere where there's seaweed where they can blend in. But I chose the sea dragons just because I feel like A, their name is super cool, and B, they have a really interesting shaped body. And I thought it would be a fun challenge to draw a fish that we don't normally think of as, well, A, as a fish. True confessions, I am not sure I completely knew that seahorses were a type of fish when I started working at the aquarium, because they're just so strange looking. They are a type of fish. They're not an invertebrate, but they've got a really, really cool body. So weedy sea dragons are related to seahorses. And there are some at the aquarium. They're in the thinking gallery, and they're just beautiful. Like I could watch them all day long. They're amazing. So I had to look and break this animal down into shapes, because when I'm confronted with an animal that's not the normal fish shape that I'm used to, shapes really help. So we're going to start with a little oval up here. and a larger oval here. And these two ovals are going to be connected by a tube. And then there's going to be another tube here. And this is just the kind of the structure for our sea dragon. And then this is their tail part. So I might have that kind of wrap around a little bit, a little fancy. And then we need one more tube, which is going to be their mouth. They have a long tube with no teeth. They use their tube like a straw to suck up little crustaceans and zooplankton. So we'll do a little surprised tiny shrimp friend there. But first we should maybe finish. Let's go do some details. We'll do a little V shape on the end of their mouth. I'm going to erase the lines that are connecting. And their eyeballs are, I was torn. I kind of like sometimes just doing a little cute dot for an eye, but sometimes I do like to do like big, more cartoony eyeballs, but we'll see. They've got a little spike on their head. And then this is my favorite part. So we're going to draw a couple more like kind of their pizzazz, their costume, if you will, that makes them a weedy sea dragon. So a little spike with kind of what looks like a leaf. And they're covered in these. They're masters of camouflage. So if you get a weedy sea dragon or I think there's only 3 species of sea dragon. There's weedy, leafy, and then I think ruby. There's like a new one that's been recently identified. But they are often, you miss them, especially when you're at the aquarium. I remember being in front of that tank and being like, people would come and be like, oh, it's just a bunch of seaweed. I'm like, no, you gotta look closer. And those are some of my favorite animals that, you don't really know they're there until you look. And I like exhibits and I like animals and I like just environments that encourage you to look deeper, whether it's looking smaller or looking longer. Sometimes just being somewhere and observing for a while, you'll be able to see things that you wouldn't notice if you're just like walking really quickly by. So we've got a couple more there. And then these cute ones on the back are kind of like more like little dewy leaves. And I'm going to shade the ones on the side because they are kind of 3-dimensional. Like the ones right here by their, I don't want to say by their butt because it's not really by their butt, on their back. There's one on one side right here and one on the other side. And we'll do a few more leaves on the bottom. And then a few more on the tail. And then we've got some down here as well. And these ones kind of trail. They're a little bit bigger, look kind of like paddles. And again, just kind of basic leaf shapes, or like teardroppy shapes. And again, I'll color this one in the back darker, and that will say that that's from behind. And so see what I mean? How I was like, I really need to break down this animal into simple shapes because there's a lot going on here. I mean, they're pretty spectacular. And I'm kind of sad that we're not working, or I'm not working in color. If you are, that's awesome. But weedy sea dragons have incredible coloration. I could just put some stripes on there for now. But if you wanted to afterwards look up these animals, look up pictures of them and color them, they're absolutely beautiful. So maybe I'll just do some patterny parts. So do some little circles. Because if I were to work on this later, maybe I'd color in some of the parts. But I've drawn these friends before. I think for the aquarium last year, I did a whole bunch of animals dressed up as their names. And for the weedy sea dragon, I didn't really change anything about them, but I did, instead of having them sucking up shrimp, I had them blowing fire like a dragon, And I thought that was kind of a cool way to add my imagination to something that's very real, but have it doing something that's not real, something that it couldn't do in nature. And I kind of like that combination. Now this really wouldn't work underwater, fire and water next. But I thought it was kind of neat. Now you could go a completely different approach to these animals. And I thought about this. Instead of breaking them down into shapes, you could literally just do something where you start with a line and then you let that kind of guide you. And this won't look exactly like what we drew because I'm just thinking about what they look like in my head, but kind of kind of allowing just them to be a little bit more organic. And this is something that's kind of fun with animals that, and same thing with like with drawing plants, because you know, when there's a lot of like squiggly parts and lines that go everywhere, it can be overwhelming to start to draw something. So a lot of times I'll just draw an animal and keep drawing it over and over and over and over again. And maybe the first time I try and draw it really, really, really realistically. And the next time I try and make it simpler and simpler and simpler. Because all drawing is a form of abstraction. Even if you're making something look photorealistic, you're still taking something and making it your own. You're abstracting it from real life. Now, I would argue that what I do is pretty far, because I like to draw cartoony. I like to make cartoony versions of animals. And it's weird, right? Because you can draw a very cartoony version, but someone can still understand that it's a sea dragon or a tiger shark or a moon snail. And I think it's kind of fun to push those boundaries to be like, how simple can I go so that you can still recognize this as a sea dragon? Like how, like maybe we want to take it and go kind of cubist. So maybe instead of soft lines, we really go hard on the hard lines, because they do, I mean, they are very angular. And again, this is me just kind of trying to think of their basic body shape and thinking about how we could treat it. And again, it's kind of fun to like, I think of it as like wearing different hats, where it's like, I'm just going to try and draw it different, and over and over and over again. And I always try to be transparent and say, hey, you know, I've been drawing for, you know, almost 40 years, and I practice a lot. It is my full-time job to draw and to write. So I do it all day long. But ever since I was little, any spare time, I keep a sketchbook and I always doodle in my sketchbook. It's just something I like to do. And there's no right or wrong way to be an artist. Maybe sometimes you only want to draw when you feel like it. But to do what I do, it is a skill that I've had to practice at over and over and over again. Nobody is born being a perfect artist, just the same way that nobody's born being like the best track runner or gymnast or violin player. Those are all things that you might be a little bit good at, but you still have to practice and practice and practice to progress. So I try and say that because I think there's times when I was younger where I was very frustrated, where I couldn't draw what I really wanted to draw in my head. There's my brain and my hand couldn't communicate. And the only way that I've gotten to do that is just practicing. And again, I've been around for a while, so it's a lot of practice. But the less precious I get about stuff, and as long as like if I'm having fun, I'm like, I'm not worried about whether or not I think this looks good. I just really enjoy drawing. Like it's fun to make marks. And for me, it's actually just like really calming. So yeah, I do like to ask people to think about your relationship to making art, and it changes when I draw for my job, so that is my job, but I still love doing it. But I still have me time drawing where I like just draw for myself, which is fun. Any weedy sea dragon questions or life of the artist questions? Maybe I'll try and draw one from.
Nope, still nothing yet.
Okay. I don't mind the no questions. One of the things we haven't done yet today, and I've tried this sometimes, is to draw a fish from the front, because it is hard. We don't normally think of, a lot of times we think of fish from the side, and they're an animal that I feel like their profile, like looking at them on the side, is very different from front on. So sometimes it's a challenge. I like to do that as well, and just think about the animal in multiple dimensions. And something that I've done, and I know a lot of artists also do, if they're going to be drawing the same character over and over again, is they make a little Sculpey mock-up version. So, and I know people who have worked in superhero comics that have done this, especially with faces. So one of my friends were drawing a bunch of Spider-Man comics, and he had sculpted a little head of Peter Parker so he could get like an upshot. So if you were to draw Spider-Man upside down, like how would a face look? Because, you know, if you change the way you look at a face, it looks very different. So we're going to move to our last animal by Weedy Sea Dragons. And this is the animal that I said, if you have a dark piece of paper, whether it's black, dark blue, dark purple, please grab it if you have a light colored pencil or a crayons, and you don't have to do this part, but we're going to go to the deep sea and draw some vampire squids because Halloween. So I did a bunch of research about vampire squids just on the internet. I looked them up. So I'm going to share some of that information with you while we draw them. So we'll do basic body shapes first. We got a circle. Okay, that's it. We're done. No, I'm just kidding. And they've got pretty large eyes. They actually have the largest eyeball to body ratio in the whole animal kingdom. And that doesn't mean they have the biggest eyes in the whole animal kingdom. It just means they have the biggest eyes in relationship to their body. So their eyes are huge compared to, they have a body that maxes out about that big, and their eyes are like, I mean, it makes sense. They live in the deep sea. They live in an area that's 2,000 to 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. So we're gonna give them some pretty big eyeballs, and I'm gonna make these friends pretty cartoony today. I would like to just for the sake of drawing, I'm gonna give them massive cartoony eyeballs. Because why not? Sometimes I'm like, I'm in charge. I can do whatever I want. And that is kind of the fun part about drawing, is like you kind of make your own rules when you're just drawing for yourself. I mean, I know I'm drawing not just for myself, I'm drawing for everybody today. And then they have tentacles. So vampire squid is a little bit of a misnomer. They do have some characteristics of squid and octopus, but they're actually closer related to octopus than they are to squid. But I don't really care. Vampire squid just sounds cool. So we're going to do 4 tentacles on this side and just pretend there's 4 on the back. So draw one kind of like a C or a D backwards. Same on that side. And then we're going to do 2 more. So one there and one there. Now their tentacles are pointy at the tips, but they're webbed together. So they've got kind of make another inverse D shape. We're just going to connect them, but keep the points. And then one in the front, like that. Oh, I forgot their cute little flappy flaps on the top. So they've got these wee little flappy flaps. These do help move them. You know what? I maybe made them too small. You know what? It's fine. Artistic license. But these fins on the top will help them swim. So they'll move them kind of like little Dumbo ears. And one of my favorite parts is what we can make this friend looking at their, I wanted to know how they ate, because I know that squids and octopuses have a beak on the inside of their body, and we'll maybe show that in a little bit. But this animal, the vampire squid, doesn't catch live prey. It's the only cephalopod, and cephalopods are cuttlefish, octopuses, squids, nautiluses, that does not catch live prey. Instead, they eat detritus, which is a fancy word for dead stuff. You can call it marine snow, but basically when you're down this deep, a lot of things that used to be alive that are now dead have broken down, and there's just little bits of delicious chunks of dead stuff everywhere. Now, how do you catch all that dead stuff? It seems like it would be really hard to do with those tentacles. So vampire squids have 2 tendrils that are specialized for catching marine snow, and they look kind of like little fishing rods. So they basically stick out one of these tendrils. They have 2, but I feel like all the footage I found, there's just one. And little bits of marine snow latch onto it. And when they get enough, there's sensors on the tendrils. I think they're little tiny hairs that will be like, oh, something stuck to me. They'll pull the tendrils back into their body and they'll feed. So let's flip this friend upside down, and I'll show you what their mouth looks like. So we got a little beak surrounded by a squishy part, and then this would be their tentacles. Upside down, friends. How many got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we'll do, there's one on the other side of that. So I find it very important to make sure my tentacle count is correct. It's the little things in life. And then we'll draw the rest of their body here. So it's kind of like they're on their side. And you can't really see their eyes, but their little tendrils will feed them. And they'll actually stick together little bits of the marine snow with mucus. So this is going to be a gross example, but it's like, okay, you want to eat some Rice Krispies? Well, take your boogers and stick a bunch of Rice Krispies together with them, and then you can eat them. Don't do that. That is not a healthy thing for humans to do. But for vampire squid, it's how they catch all these little tiny foods and get their nutrients. So they'll put those in there. Okay. Are you excited about vampire squid? I hope you are. I felt like this is the most exciting stuff that I've learned in a long time. We're going to talk about vampire squid and how they protect themselves. So, new page. I learned that they do not have an ink sac. So they cannot produce ink like lots of other squids and octopuses. But they have two main forms of defense. So if something bothers them or tries to eat them or, just messes with them, what they'll do is they will take their tentacles and they'll flip them inside out on top of their body. So we're going to draw that. It's going to be a little wonky at first, but that's okay. So imagine that that's one tentacle. There's three. It's kind of like we're making a big multiple W or the bat signal, which is not my intention, but you know what? That's okay. That's what it looks like. 1, 2 down there. We're going to erase where their head is. And on the underside of their tentacles, they do have these little spiky protrusions sticking out. So we'll draw just that part of the tentacle. And we're going to draw the spikes in a second. Well, my favorite part about this line of defense is that scientists call this either pumpkin or pineapple posture or posturing. So I call it like pumpkin pose because I feel like that's just an easier name for me to remember. But it's like, I love that the vampire squid goes into pumpkin pose. It's like seasonally appropriate. But this is a method that will hopefully deter or discourage prey from messing with the vampire squid. So I think we need to have that evident. So we're going to have a little word balloon that says, go away. Because sometimes it's nice to reinforce what's going on with words. And that's why I love using comics in my cartoons or using cartoons this way. Now, if this doesn't work, they have a last resort. And it's a last resort because the method of protection that I'm going to show you for vampire squid takes a lot of energy. And you already saw the tiny, tiny food that they eat. They don't get a lot of energy. They're not catching fish left and right. They have to reserve energy living in this place that's dark and cold. Oh, and it has like, 3% of the oxygen that's normally in water for stuff higher up. So their bodies are specifically adapted to deal with this extreme environment. But if something's really messing with them and they want to get away, they can't do the whole ink sac thing, but they can produce a cloud of glowing mucus that will hopefully discourage a predator. So we're going to make a vampire squid make that mucus cloud. And we're doing I don't feel as bad because this isn't a real vampire squid. It's our drawing. So it's not like we're really stressing out this animal.